Poland, the Canterbury Medal of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, and Princeton University's President's Award for Distinguished Teaching. His books are many. They include Making Men Moral, Civil Liberties, and Public Morality, and In Defense of Natural Law, both published by Oxford University Press, as well as Conscience and Its Enemies, Confronting the Dogmas of Liberal Secularism, and What is Marriage, co-authored with Sharif Girgis and Ryan Anderson. The Catholic Church Magisterium's teaching on religious liberty has been articulated in Vatican II's Declaration on Religious Liberty, Dignitatis Humanae, and can be stated basically as follows: as part of human dignity, the state may not coerce a person to think or act a certain way in the area of religious belief, but must allow all persons to pursue the truth freely. After the presentation, there will be time for questions. So please join me now in offering a joyful welcome to Professor Robert George.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out on this rainy and cold night. It's really kind of you to come to be with me. And I want to say a special thanks to my wonderful former student, Father Mike. I'm not alone at Princeton. Everyone at Princeton is proud of what Father has become and what he does. Bravo to Father Mike. Thanks too to Tanya and Kathy and Betsy, who took me to dinner, which was lovely, just across the street at Gennaro's. What fun that was. And thanks not only to the St. Greg's parishioners, but some of my dear friends from St. Paul's who've made the trek out here to be here tonight. Now, my remarks are somewhat lengthy. I tried to think of what to do about that, and I thought, well, one thing I could do is deliver these remarks in Hebrew. I'd leave the vowels out, and that would save some time. But instead, I decided that what I'd do is just cut out some material. So the material I cut out will undoubtedly generate some wonderful questions from you, because you'll say, what about thus and so? So at the end, please feel free to ask me just anything you want about the subject this evening. Writing from a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama, Dr. Martin Luther King anticipated a challenge to the moral legitimacy, the goodness of the acts of civil disobedience that had landed him behind bars. You'll perhaps recall that the great civil rights leader anticipated a challenge to these acts. He anticipated his critics asking him, "How can you, Dr. King, engage in willful lawbreaking when you yourself had stressed the importance of obedience to law in demanding that officials of the southern states conform to the Supreme Court's desegregation ruling just a few years earlier in the case of Brown against Board of Education?" Well, here's how Dr. King, in his famous letter from the Birmingham jail, responded to that challenge. And I quote, "The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of law, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral obligation to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now," King says, continuing, I'm still quoting, "what is the difference between the two, just and unjust? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law, or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority." Unquote. Perhaps you can imagine how much I enjoy quoting Dr. King on this matter, especially invoking St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas and the moral law and the law of God and the natural law at Princeton. My colleagues appreciate it so much, so it's great. So, just laws elevate and ennoble the personality, or what King in other contexts refers to as the human spirit. Unjust laws debase and degrade the human spirit. Now, his point about the morality or immorality of laws is a good reminder that what's true of what is sometimes called personal morality is also true of political morality. The choices and actions of political institutions, Congresses, presidents, courts, at every level, like the choices and actions of individuals, can be right or wrong, morally good or morally bad. They can be in line with human well-being and fulfillment in all of their manifold dimensions, or they can fail in any of a range of ways to respect the integral flourishing of human persons. That's what moral norms actually are, whether we're talking about the norms governing our personal lives or the norms governing political institutions. Moral norms are norms that preserve, that protect the well-being of flesh and blood human beings, what philosophers call our integral fulfillment. Now, in many cases of the failure of laws, policies, and institutions to fulfill the requirements of morality, we speak intelligibly and rightly of a violation of human rights. That's a very familiar form of discourse these days, right? Everybody understands that when we're talking about political morality, the morality of political institutions, whether they're national or international, very often we speak in terms of human rights, and that's good and that's fine. And it's particularly true where the failure, the moral failure, is properly characterized as an injustice, failing to honor people's equal worth and dignity, failing to give them or even actively denying them what they are due. This is what Dr. King points out. This is what he points to in segregation laws. That's why they're unjust. Violations of human rights, not giving people what they're due, treating people unequally. It's what we point to today when we condemn the abortion license and the abortion power and the abortion lobby, denying people their rights, the child in the womb, treating some people as superior and others are inferior on the basis of an arbitrary thing, like whether you happen to have come through the birth canal or not. Now, to be sure, human rights, including the right to religious liberty, which is what we're going to be focused on this evening, are among the moral principles that demand respect from all of us, including governments and international institutions. And these institutions, governmental and international institutions, are bound morally not only to respect people's rights, but also to protect their rights, make sure that other institutions or other people aren't violating their rights. To respect people, to respect their dignity, is to, among other things, honor their rights, their human rights, including the right that we are gathered here tonight to talk about, the right to religious freedom. Like all moral principles, however, human rights, including the right to religious liberty, are shaped and given content by the human goods they protect. This is just a specification of that general principle that I talked about a moment ago. All moral norms are what they are because they protect aspects of human well-being, human fulfillment, the human good, our fundamental fulfillment, our fundamental well-being. And that's true in this particular case. The right to religious freedom is a genuine human right because it protects a genuine human good. And I'm going to talk in a moment about what that human good is. Rights, like other moral principles, are intelligible. We can get hold of them, intellectual. We can grasp them as action-guiding principles because they are entailments and at some level specifications of the integral directiveness or prescriptivity of those principles, those moral norms that direct our choosing toward what uplifts the human personality, to quote Dr. King, and away from what degrades it. And so, for example, it matters to the identification of the right to life, whether we're talking about it in the abortion context or we're talking about it in the context of the prohibition against killing non-combatants in wars or killing captured soldiers or what have you. It matters to the identification of the right to life. That human life is no mere instrumental good, like your car or like the money in your pocket. No mere instrumental good, not something that's simply a means, but is an intrinsic good, an intrinsic aspect of the good of human persons, an integral dimension of our flourishing. Our life is not just something we own. It's not just a possession. It's not just a thing. Our children are not just things because they're human beings. If there's a fundamental distinction governing all of ethics, it's the distinction between persons and things, between human beings and all the stuff we like because of what we can do with it, but is not part of us. And it matters similarly to the identification and defense of the right to religious liberty, that religion is yet another irreducible aspect of human well-being and fulfillment, what philosophers or some philosophers call a basic human good. In other words, it's not just an instrumental good like money. Money's valuable because of what you can get with it. Otherwise, it's just funny-looking paper. Your car is valuable because it can get you somewhere, or it's a collector's item or something like that. My car is getting so old, if it has any value, it's as a collector's item because pretty soon it's not going to be able to get me anywhere. But it's a thing. It's an object. It's an instrumental good. I want it. I have use for it. But I want it precisely because I have use for it. Religion, by contrast, like our lives, or like our friendships or relationships with our children or our siblings or our spouses, or the pursuit of beauty, these, unlike mere instrumental goods, are intrinsically valuable. They're part of the human spirit, the thing that Dr. King says, rightly, is uplifted by what is moral and degraded by what is immoral. So I've asserted, and so far merely asserted, I haven't yet given you an argument, I've asserted that the good that is protected by the right to religious freedom is the good of religion, but now we have to ask ourselves, well, what is religion? And why should we call it good? After all, there are many, many people today. We'll start with happens to be actually an old friend of mine, Richard Dawkins. We were together for a number of years when I was a graduate student and a lecturer, a junior faculty member at Oxford University. He and I were in the same college. We had many coffees together and sat together at lunch and so forth. He's actually quite a nice guy and an interesting guy. But he's the guy who will tell you, religion bad. Religion bad. And here I am up in front of all of you saying religion is a human good. Can I defend that? Well, what is religion? In its fullest and most robust sense, religion is the human person's being in right relation to the divine. That is, the more than merely human source or sources, if there be such things, of meaning and value. Now, Dawkins thinks there aren't any more than merely human sources of meaning and value. Right? I say there are. Religious people say there are, whether those people are Catholics or Protestants, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians. Some of those traditions of faith have a theistic view of the divine. Some, such as Buddhism, or at least Theravada Buddhism, the kind of Buddhism that you find in Southeast Asia, don't have the concept of a personal God, and yet they have the concept of divinity. But what religion is, I assert, is the human beings being in right relation to the divine, if there is anything more than merely the material that we see here. Now, of course, even the greatest among us in the things of the Spirit, the great saints and heroes, the Mother Teresas, the Padre Pios, fall short of perfection in various ways. Sole exception of Our Lady, of course. But in the ideal of perfect religion, the person would understand as comprehensively and deeply as possible the body of truths about spiritual things, whatever those truths are, and would fully order his or her life and share in a community of faith that is ordered in line with those truths. In the perfect realization of the good of religion, one would achieve the relationship that the divine, on the Christian understanding or Jewish understanding or Muslim understanding, God himself, if we assume just for the sake of argument for the moment monotheism, wishes us to have with him. Now, of course, different traditions of faith, as I've already noted, have different views of what constitutes religion in its fullest and most robust sense. There are different doctrines, different scriptures, the Upanishads, the Quran, the Bible, different structures of authority, different ideas of what is true about spiritual things and what it means to be in proper relationship to the more than merely human sources of meaning and value that different traditions understand as divinity. Now, for my part, and in this audience perhaps this will be less controversial than it is in some other audiences because we're, I'm guessing, mostly Catholics. On the Catholic understanding, reason, the old noggin, the intellect, the mind, has a very large role to play for each of us in deciding where spiritual truth most robustly is to be found. If we went down the road to visit some of our more evangelical Protestant churches, they might have a little bit lower, perhaps a lot lower view of the power of reason in these matters, and a more elevated view of the role of revelation. All right? Now, we Catholics certainly believe in revelation. We believe in the necessity of revelation. But we also believe that reason has a very large role to play in figuring out what the truth is about spiritual matters. And by reason here, I mean more than merely our capacity for moral reasoning. Also our capacities for understanding and evaluating claims of all sorts, logical, historical, scientific, and so forth. This is why the Vatican insists on the rigorous examination of claims to miracles. You know, the church won't just accept, in fact, most claims to miracles the church rejects if they ever actually get consideration. There's a very high standard. If you have a cause of a potential saint you're favoring, and you want a miracle to prove the sanctity of the person that you're advancing, most recently Cardinal Newman, the former mayor of, the late former mayor of New York, Ed Koch, was a great friend of Cardinal O'Connor's, and although Mayor Koch wasn't Catholic, he was Jewish, he believed that John O'Connor was a saint. And after John O'Connor died, he actually sent a petition to the Vatican based on what he believed, based on a miracle, what he believed was a miracle that he received, a health-related miracle that he received through the intercession of Cardinal O'Connor, which is quite a remarkable, wonderful story. And that's how the church figures things like that out. That's the evaluation of scientific claims. Can we explain this in natural terms? Or are we finally forced to say, no, there's no natural explanation for this, it's a miracle? Koch thought he had a miracle. I don't know if the Vatican ever seriously considered it, but that's how it works. When we think about whether we should be Christians or not, maybe we were raised in the Christian faith, maybe we were raised in the Catholic faith, we think about, well, is it really true? Or should I be a Buddhist? You know, it seems to be the fashion in Hollywood. Maybe I should be a Buddhist. One of the things we think about is the reliability of the Gospels. Does those stories about Jesus hang together? Can we believe them? That's the evaluation of historical claims. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Can we credit the testimony of the apostles? Or not? Is it plausible that they could have made the whole thing up or imagined the whole thing? That's how we work. That's how we think. But one doesn't actually even need to agree with Catholic teaching about the role of reason. You can take the lower view that many evangelical Protestant traditions take and still affirm, as we all should, that there is a distinct basic good of religion. A good that is unique in that it helps to shape our participation in and pursuit of all the other goods. When religion is part of our lives, when the good of religion is part of our lives, it affects the whole of our lives. It affects our sense of what our vocation or calling is. It affects our marriages. It affects our family relationships, our friendships. It sort of governs the whole of life, even those dimensions of life that are, properly speaking, secular. And we should understand that one begins to realize and participate in this good, the good I'm calling religion, from the moment one begins the quest to understand the more than merely human sources of meaning and value, and to live authentically by ordering one's life in line with one's best judgment of the truth of religious matters. Whether one's best judgment is theistic and Christian, or whether one's best judgment is, let's say, atheistic. Albert Camus, the great French existentialist and novelist, in my view, was participating in the good of religion. He was getting at least off the ground in the good of religion by his sincere quest to understand the meaning of things, the nature of things, the meaning of life, whether there was anything more than what we see around us, even though his own conclusions, at least tentatively, were not theistic. He was still engaging in that good. He was doing something humanly fulfilling. I happen to think he got some very important questions wrong, but in asking those questions, in sincerely seeking the truth, in ordering his life, which he tried to do in line with the truth as best he could judge it, he's already participating in the good of religion. So if I'm right, then the existential raising of religious questions, you can scratch fancy words like existential, leave it out. The raising of religious questions, asking about the meaning of things, asking about whether there is anything to the spiritual. The raising of religious questions, the honest identification of answers, where you're not just reaching the answer that you'd like to reach because it makes you feel good, or the answer that's favored by your friends, or the answer that makes you fit in better in the society, but where you're really being honest fundamentally with yourself. So when you're raising the questions, when you're honestly trying to answer them, and where you're sincerely trying to live and order your life in line with those, then you are participating in the good of religion. If I'm right, the good of religion is a three-part matter. The raising of questions, the honest identification of answers, the living of one's life authentically in line with one's best judgments, where one isn't being a fake, one's not being a conformist, one's not just towing a party line, one's not pretending to be something one's not, going to church to look good. Or maybe if you're in Princeton, not going to church in order to look good. When you actually believe. But you get what I'm driving at here. That these together constitute the good of religion. And it begins with a quest. It begins with... Now, the more right answers you get, the more authentically you live in line with the right answers, the richer your participation in the good of religion. But even Camus is beginning to participate in. And by the way, can we go back to my friend Richard Dawkins? If I'm right, I don't think Dawkins has anything to complain about, other than perhaps the label, in referring to the importance of the good of religion, because I know Richard. He would not want his children not to raise those existential questions, honestly try to answer them, and then to live authentically in line with his best answers, the kids' best answers, even if the kids' answers differ from Richard's own. He wouldn't want his kids to be fakes. He would see the point, the value of participating in the truth-seeking enterprise that is at the foundation of religious faith. If I'm right, again, then man is, as a dear friend of mine, Seamus Hassan, puts it, intrinsically and by nature, a religious being. We're religious by nature. We're truth seekers by nature. Even the most primitive peoples, in the most primitive circumstances, are asking those spiritual questions. You notice that? Religion begins to emerge even in the most primitive societies. Primitive people don't tend to be materialists, quite the opposite. We might accuse them of superstition with some justice, But they're certainly not materialists. They're interested in the meaning of life, the meaning of things, in spirituality, and whether there's anything more than this material existence. And they have a sense that there is something more than this. They have a sense that there are human relationships that contain meaning that can't be accounted for by empirical science, even when empirical science begins to actually emerge in a culture. They know they can't explain away love by reference to the movement of molecules. They understand there are spiritual realities. But now, if all this is true, then respect for a person's well-being, you, me, our neighbor, folks over in China, anyone's well-being, respect for a person's well-being demands respect for his or her flourishing as a seeker of religious truth and as a man or a woman who lives in line with his or her best judgments as to what is in fact true in spiritual matters. And that in turn requires respect for the person's liberty in the religious quest. If I'm right about what religion is, the raising of the questions, the effort to honestly answer them, the effort to live authentically in line with your answers. If that's all true, then you don't help a person by coercing them, by forcing them, or trying to force them to believe what they don't believe, which you can't do anyway, or by forcing them to behave in ways that are contrary to their beliefs, or forcing them to be inauthentic, to not be in church when they believe they should be in church, or to be in church when they believe they shouldn't be in church, or what have you. That's the importance of religious freedom. It protects that good that can only be participated in freely. There is no such thing as coerced true participation in religion. This is not to say you shouldn't force your kids to go to church. Just don't think when they're there under compulsion, they are participating in the good of religion yet. They'll get there. But there is no coercion. Faith by its very nature is free. It can't be coerced. A coerced faith is no faith at all. Right? Whether that faith, by the way, is faith in God or faith in the communist utopia. You can force a person to say, oh yes, I believe in the great triumph of the working class and the dictatorship of the proletariat and the withering away of the state, just as Marx said in the Communist Manifesto with Engels. But you can't make a person believe that in his heart. You can make him say the outward words, but you can't make him believe it. Faith is by nature free. Any type of faith cannot be faith unless it's free. And respect for the person, respect for his or her dignity as a free and rational creature, requires then respect for religious liberty, that person's liberty to pursue the religious quest, to live authentically in line with honest judgments. And that's why it makes sense, my friends, from the point of view of reason, and not merely from the point of view of the revealed teaching of the church. Though many faiths, including the Catholic faith, do propose a right to religious freedom on theological grounds, nevertheless, it's true even based on rational inquiry that we should understand religious freedom as a fundamental human right. Now, interestingly and tragically, in times past, and alas, as we have all too much good reason to know, even today in some places, regard for a person's spiritual well-being has been the premise and motivating factor for denying religious liberty, or conceiving of it in a very cramped and restricted way, for trying to coerce people in religion. Before the Catholic Church embraced the robust conception of religious freedom that honors the civil right to give public witness and expression to religious views, even when erroneous, in the document Father Mike mentioned, Dignitatis Humanae of the Second Vatican Council, some Catholics, including some high churchmen, rejected the idea of a right to religious freedom on the theory that only the truth has rights. That became a sort of slogan for people, including Catholics, who rejected the teaching of the Second Vatican Council on religious liberty. Only the truth has rights. The idea there was that the state, at least under favoring conditions, should not only publicly identify itself with Catholicism as the true faith, something that contemporary integralists still hold. But going beyond that, the argument was the state, at least under favoring conditions where it can get away with it, should forbid religious advocacy or proselytizing that could lead people into religious error and apostasy. So some people said, if you're in a Catholic country, the law should forbid Mormon missionaries from knocking on people's doors or Jehovah's Witnesses from knocking on people's doors because they'll lead people astray. And we can't have that. So they were going to shut down the religious freedom, at least when it came to testimony, to giving their beliefs, stating their beliefs publicly, for Mormons or for Jehovah's Witnesses or for other non-Catholics. Now, the mistake in that was not in the premise. That premise is true, and that is that religion is a great human good, and the truer the religion, the better for the fulfillment, and indeed the salvation, of the believer. As I say, that is absolutely true. The mistake, rather, was in the supposition made by some that the good of religion was not being advanced or participated in outside the context of the one true faith, and that it could reliably be protected and advanced by placing civil restrictions, enforceable by agencies of the state, on the advocacy of religious ideas, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and so forth. In rejecting this supposition, which is exactly what the Second Vatican Council did in Dignitatis Humanae, in rejecting that proposition, the fathers of the Second Vatican Council did not embrace the idea that error has rights. The fathers noticed, rather, that people have rights, and they have rights even when they are in error. And among those rights, integral to authentic religion as a fundamental and irreducible aspect of the human good, is the right to express and advocate in line with one's best sense of conscientious obligation what one believes to be true about spiritual matters, even if one's beliefs are, in one way or another, less than fully sound, and indeed even if they are false. Denying that God is triune, which is, of course, something that Jews and Muslims do. Or denying that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Or denying the Immaculate Conception of Mary, or her Assumption, or what have you. Now, when I have assigned the document Dignitatis Humanae in my courses at Princeton on questions of religious liberty, I've always stressed to my students, whether they're Catholic or not, the importance of reading another document of the Second Vatican Council together with it. And that document is called Nostra Aetate. Whether one is Catholic or not, I don't think it's possible to achieve a full understanding of the Declaration on Religious Liberty, Dignitatis Humanae, or the developed teaching of the Catholic Church on religious freedom, without considering what the Council Fathers proclaim in Nostra Aetate, which was the declaration on the non-Christian religions and the relationship of the Church and of Christianity to the non-Christian faiths. Now, Nostra Aetate is fairly well known. I mean, as Vatican II documents go, it's a pretty well-known document, but mostly for one little, very important, very, very important, but small section, and that's the section on the relationship of the Church to the Jewish people and to Judaism. If you ask someone who knows a little about it or has heard of Nostra Aetate, they would likely say, oh yes, that's the Church's teaching on the Jews and Judaism. Well, that's included in there, but that's only part. It's about the Church's relationship and understanding of, and as you'll see in a moment, appreciation of, the non-Christian religions more generally. In Nostra Aetate, the Fathers pay tribute to all that is true and holy, implying and then explicitly saying that there is much that is good and worthy in non-Christian faiths, including Hinduism and Buddhism, and especially in Judaism and Islam. In so doing, the Fathers of the Council give recognition to the ways in which religion, even where it does not include the defining content of what the Fathers, as Catholics, believe to be religion in its fullest and most robust sense, namely the incarnation of Jesus Christ, nevertheless enriches, ennobles, and fulfills the human person in the spiritual dimension of his being. So they see that there's something religious. There's something that qualifies as religion, the good of religion. Even if we're not yet, at least, affirming fundamental Christian doctrines, the doctrines that distinguish Christianity from the other faiths. What they're saying essentially is what I was saying, that in the fundamental religious quest, in raising the questions, in honestly trying to answer them, in trying to live authentically in line with them, in reaching for the spiritual truths, one is already participating in the good of religion and gaining its fulfillments, partial fulfillments. Now again, you get more truth, you get more fulfillment. This is not an argument for religious relativism. The council is not saying all religions are true. All religions are alike. We shouldn't worry about differences about doctrine. There are other churches that say stuff like that, not the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is still making its claim to be the one true church in the sense of the church that teaches the fullness of religious truth. But at the same time recognizing what is good and worthy. Indeed, I'm just quoting the language of the council, what is true and holy in the world's religions. Now, naturally, the non-recognition of Christ as the Son of God must count for the fathers as a serious falling short in the non-Christian Christian faiths, even the Jewish faith in which Christianity is itself rooted, in which stands, according to Catholic teaching, in an unbroken and unbreakable covenant with God. Just as, it might be pointed out, the proclamation of Christ as the Son of God must count as an error in Christianity from a Jewish or a Muslim point of view. But the fathers teach the error of failing to recognize the incarnation does not mean that Judaism and Islam are simply false and without merit. On the contrary, these traditions enrich the lives of their faithful in their spiritual dimensions, thus contributing vitally to their fulfillment. And this is to be honored and respected, and therefore the liberty of those people, of all people, in the spiritual quest must be respected because of the dignity of the human person, because the dignity of the human person requires it. That's why the Declaration on Religious Liberty is called Dignitatis Humanae, human dignity, the dignity of the human being. We do not respect the dignity of the human being when we force him to be a Catholic, whatever that would mean. How could someone be a Catholic, a real Catholic, if they're forced to be a Catholic? We might say, well, you do that every time a baby's born about a week later, right? We force them to be a Catholic. But eventually, you embrace it or you don't embrace it. It can't be forced on you. And it's wrong to try. That's the big step forward here with Dignitatis Humanae. It's wrong. It's a violation of human dignity to use the coercive power of the state or any coercive power to force someone to believe what they don't believe or to act contrary to their beliefs. Now, the Catholic Church does not have a monopoly on the so-called natural law reasoning by which I'm this evening explicating and defending the human right to religious liberty. But the Church does have a deep commitment to such reasoning, natural law reasoning, and a long experience with it. And in Dignitatis Humanae, the Fathers of the Council present a natural law argument for religious freedom. Indeed, they begin with that argument, presenting it in rational terms, without any appeal to revelation, before later in the second half of the document supplementing the argument from natural law with specific appeals to the data of revelation, what's to be gleaned about the importance of religious freedom from Scripture. Now let me quote at some length from Nostra Aetate to give you an appreciation of the rational basis of the Catholic Church's affirmation of the good of religion as manifested in the different traditions of faith. I do this in order to show how Catholicism roots its defense of a robust conception of religious freedom not in a mere modus vivendi, which is a common typical liberal argument for religious freedom. We should have a deal, a social contract. Okay, why should we respect religious freedom? Because we're going to make a deal. I respect yours if you respect mine. That's not the Catholic angle on these things. We don't respect people's religious liberty as part of a mutual non-aggression pact with other faiths or people of other faiths. Much less do we root the Catholic understanding of religious freedom on religious indifferentism or religious relativism. Oh, all religions are true, or all religions are equal, all religions are false, or no religion's any better than any other. Rather, Catholicism roots its understanding of religious freedom and its importance in a rational affirmation of the value of religion, the human goodness of religion, the human fulfillment available by participating in the good of religion, made available to people by the many traditions of faith. So here's what Nostra Aetate has to say. And let me quote. This is so interesting. I'm wondering if, don't want to put people on the spot, but is there anyone who's read Nostra Aetate? Okay, somebody back there. Well, then we have a lot of people who might be a little surprised by what is said. But here is the official teaching of the Catholic Church, presented, expounded in an ecumenical council, the Second Vatican Council. I quote, "Throughout history, and even to the present day, there is found among different peoples a certain awareness of a hidden power which lies behind the course of nature and the events of human life. At times there is present even a recognition of a supreme being, or still more, of a father. This awareness and recognition results in a way of life that is imbued with a deep religious sense." So far I'm going to interrupt the council now, just to say, notice that statement, people imbued with a profound religious sense, is about religion before we even get to anything that would be recognizable as a developed or modern religion. We're talking about primitive religion here. Now it goes on. "The religions which are found in more advanced civilizations endeavor by way of well-defined concepts and exact language to answer these questions. Thus, in Hinduism, men explore the divine mystery and express it both in the limitless riches of myth and the accurately defined insights of philosophy. They seek release from the trials of the present life by ascetical practices, profound meditation, and recourse to God in confidence and love. Buddhism, in its various forms, testifies to the essential inadequacy of this changing world. It proposes a way of life by which men can, with confidence and trust, attain a state of perfect liberation and reach supreme illumination, either through their own efforts or by the aid of divine help. So too other religions, which are found throughout the world, attempt in their own ways to calm the hearts of men by outlining a program of life covering doctrine, moral precepts, and sacred rites." Now I've written what I'm about to quote in bold. You see, that's the bold one. "The Catholic Church rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. She has a high regard for the manner of life and conduct, the precepts and doctrines, which, though differing in many ways from her own teaching, nevertheless often reflect truths which enlighten all men. Yet she proclaims, and is in duty bound to proclaim without fail, Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life." John 1:6. "In him in whom God reconciled all things to himself." 2 Corinthians 15:18. Men find the fullness of their religious life. That's where they find the fullness, in Christ, in the Christian religion, in the Catholic faith. They find the fullness of religious life. But because the fullness is there doesn't mean there's nothing true and good, true and holy in the other faiths. Nothing to be affirmed, nothing to be honored. Now I'm quoting again. "The Church therefore urges her sons to enter with prudence and charity into discussion and collaboration with members of other religions. Let Christians, while witnessing to their own faith and way of life, acknowledge, preserve, and encourage the spiritual and moral truths found among non-Christians." Get this now, I'm continuing to quote. The church has also a high regard for the Muslims. They worship God, who is one, living and subsistent, merciful and almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, who has spoken to men. They strive to submit themselves without reserve to the decrees of God, just as Abraham submitted himself to God's plan, to whose faith Muslims link their own. Although not acknowledging Jesus as God, they revere him as a prophet. His virgin mother they also honor and even at times devoutly invoke. Further, they await the day of judgment and the reward of God following the resurrection of the dead. For this reason, they highly esteem an upright life and worship God, especially by way of prayer, almsgiving, and fasting. Over the centuries, many quarrels and dissensions have arisen between Christians and Muslims. Now remember, this is written in 1965. Over the centuries, many quarrels and dissensions have arisen between Christians and Muslims. This sacred council now pleads with all to forget the past and urges that a sincere effort be made to achieve mutual understanding for the benefit of all men. Let them together preserve and promote peace, liberty, justice, and moral values. The church is saying we should be working together to uphold the important values, life, marriage, religious freedom itself, and so forth. And now we finally get to the part for which Nostra Aetate is most famous, the teaching on the Jewish people in Judaism. Now here's what the council says about that. This is more familiar. Sounding the depths of the mystery which is the church, this sacred council remembers the spiritual ties which link the people of the new covenant, that's us, to the stock of Abraham. The church of Jewish people. The Church of Christ acknowledges that in God's plan of salvation, the beginning of her faith and election is to be found in the patriarchs and in Moses and the prophets. She professes that all Christ's faithful, who as men of faith are sons of Abraham, are included in the same patriarch's call, and that the salvation of the church is mystically prefigured in the exodus of God's chosen people from the land of bondage. On this account, the church cannot forget that she received the revelation of the Old Testament by way of that people with whom God, in his inexpressible mercy, established the ancient covenant. Nor can she forget that she, the church, draws nourishment still from that good olive tree, Jews, onto which the wild olive branches of the Gentiles, us, have been grafted. Romans 11:17. The church believes that Christ, who is our peace, has through his cross reconciled Jews and Gentiles and made them one in himself. So this is where the council, and I say this is the famous part, repudiates anti-Semitism, the charge that the Jews are guilty of the death of Christ, that there's a blood guilt of the Jewish people for what happened to Jesus, the idea that the covenant of the Old Testament has been superseded and replaced. This is the heresy called Marcionism, that the God of the Old Testament is not really the God of the New Testament. The God of the Old Testament is angry and filled with fury and hatred and so forth. The God of the New Testament is the God of love and the God of Jesus and so forth. The idea that the Jewish covenant has been revoked, all this is repudiated by the Second Vatican Council, citing scriptural sources and others. All right, now back to my own voice. Of course, from the point of view of any believer, the further one gets away from truth, from the truth of the faith in all its dimensions, what the Council Fathers referred to as the fullness of religious life, the less fulfillment is available. So if you're a Muslim, you think that to the extent that Christians go off the rails by believing that God is triune or that Jesus is the Son of God, there's less value in Christianity than there is in Islam. Logically, that's necessary. And by the same logic, a Christian who believes that Muslims, who understands that Muslims don't affirm the Trinity of that God is triune or that Jesus is the Son of God, have to believe that there's a falling short, that there's a loss in the failure to get those doctrines right. But none of this means that even a primitive and superstition-laden faith, much less the faiths of those advanced civilizations to which the Fathers refer, is utterly devoid of value, or that there is no right to religious liberty for people who practice such a faith. Nor does it mean that atheists have no right to religious freedom. My pal Richard Dawkins might be glad to hear that. The fundaments of respect for the good of religion require that civil authority respect and in appropriate ways even nurture conditions or circumstances in which people can engage in the sincere religious quest, as Camus did, and live lives of authenticity, reflecting their best judgments as to the truth of spiritual matters. If you ask me, should Richard Dawkins be free to profess his atheism? I want to say absolutely, that's a matter of his religious freedom. If you ask me, would Richard Dawkins be better off if he knew the truth of theism? I'd say absolutely, of course. Those are not inconsistent propositions. To compel an atheist to perform acts that are premised on theistic belief that he cannot in good conscience share is to deny him the fundamental bit of the good of religion that is his, namely, living with honesty and integrity in line with his best judgments about ultimate reality. Coercing him to perform religious acts does him no good, since faith really must be free, and dishonors his dignity as a free and rational person. So the violation of liberty there, of religious liberty there, is worse than futile. It's not just that he's not going to actually get anything out of, say, being compelled to go to Mass. He's actually going to be harmed by that coercion. Now, of course, there are limits to the freedom that must be respected for the sake of the good of religion and the dignity of the human person as a being whose integral fulfillment includes the spiritual quest and the ordering of one's life in line with one's best judgment as to what spiritual truth requires. Gross evil, even grave injustice, can be committed by sincere people for the sake of religion. Sincere people. Unspeakable wrongs can be done by people seeking sincerely to get right with God, or the gods, or their conception of divinity or ultimate reality, whatever it is. The presumption in favor of respecting liberty must, for the sake of the human good and the dignity of human persons as free and rational creatures, be powerful and broad, but it's not unlimited, and it can't be. Even the great end of getting right with God cannot justify a morally bad means, even for the sincere believer. I have no doubt of the sincerity of the ancient Aztecs, who, as we were reminded recently by yet another discovery of a mass graveyard, I don't doubt the sincerity of the Aztecs in practicing human sacrifice, or the sincerity of those in the history of various traditions of faith who used coercion and even torture in the case of what they believed, in the cause of what they believed was religiously required, including Christians, including Catholics, including church officials. But these things are deeply wrong and need not and should not be tolerated in the name of religious freedom. To suppose otherwise is to back oneself into the awkward position of supposing that violations of religious freedom and other injustices of equal gravity must be respected for the sake of religious freedom, and obviously that can't be right. Still, to overcome the powerful and broad presumption in favor of religious liberty, to be justified in requiring the believer to do something contrary to his faith, or forbidding the believer from doing something his faith requires, political authority must meet a heavy burden. The legal test here in the United States under the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, we have a federal one and then we have many state ones, is one way of capturing that presumption and burden. And this is not to suggest that there are not going to be close cases. There are definitely going to be borderline cases where reasonable people of goodwill can disagree whether that comes within the ambit of protected religious freedom or not. At dinner, Father Mike and I were talking about the interesting problem of what to do about satanic black masses. You know, should those be tolerated, and what are the limits of that? There are clearly gray areas. But here's the legal test in the United States. To justify a law that bears negatively on religious freedom, so to force a evangelical baker to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, or to force a doctor, a Catholic doctor, to perform an abortion or whatever. To justify a law that bears negatively on religious freedom, even a neutral law of general applicability, that is, a law that's not designed to target somebody, must be supported by what the law calls a compelling state interest. That is, you need a really important reason for it. It's got to be something very fundamental to the reason we have a government in the first place. And also, in addition to that, it only has to be for a really serious purpose, It has to represent the least restrictive or intrusive means of protecting or serving that interest, that purpose. Now, we can debate, as a matter of American constitutional law or as a matter of policy, whether it is or should be up to the courts or legislators to decide when exemptions to general neutral law should be granted for the sake of religious freedom, or to determine when the presumption in favor of religious freedom has or hasn't been overcome, those borderline cases. But the substantive matter of what religious freedom demands from those who exercise the levers of state power should be something on which reasonable people of goodwill across the religious and political spectrums should agree on, precisely because it is a matter that does not depend on anybody's faith, but can be settled by our common human reason. And with that, I thank you very much for your very kind indulgence in listening to that long lecture. Floor is open. Did everyone hear the question? No. Okay. It's a really important and good one. Now, if I misrepresent it, you make me fix it. So the question is, all right, we're Catholics, we're Christians, we're called upon by the Lord himself in the Gospel, Great Commission, to give testimony to the truth. But how do we do that in a way that it doesn't itself trespass on the dignity of a person of another faith, let's say, or another person of a different belief, that doesn't insult that person's dignity, and that doesn't undermine our own efforts to give Christian witness, contradict our own Christian commitments and obligations. This is short of using state power. So much of my lecture was about state power, right? Not having the state come in and compel Richard Dawkins to go to Mass. Might do him some good. At least you have to see it. But this is about the personal witness of a Christian, about when do we speak up and promote the faith? When do we evangelize? Now, we Catholics have, for at least my entire lifetime, me as much as anyone else, I'm not pointing the finger at other people, pointing the finger right here. We Catholics, I think, on the whole, have told ourselves, it's more than a half-truth, but it's not a whole truth. Let's call it a 7/8 truth. And that 7/8 truth is the way we Catholics, unlike the evangelicals and unlike the Mormons, the way we Catholics evangelize is not by knocking on people's door or asking people whether they've accepted Jesus Christ as their personal Savior, or going out and grabbing people by the lapels and saying, you know, have you considered the truths of the Catholic faith? That the way we evangelize is by setting a good example. Now that's 7/8 is a heck of a lot of truth, right? And I think that's probably the most important way that Catholics evangelize. So we're not just completely lying to ourselves. But I think we are called to do more than that, and it is hard. Not because we're trespassing on people's religious liberty, just because it's awkward. It's awkward to talk about a thing as personal as faith. And you don't want to come across as somebody who sticks his nose in other people's business and so forth. So I think the answer to your question is that this is a matter of prudential judgment. But it's not one that we can simply dismiss because it's a matter of prudential judgment. It's secondary or insignificant. It's important, but we have to know that, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there's a time and a place. Just to take an extreme example, if you're invited to your Jewish neighbor's Passover Seder, if they honor you with an invitation, not a great occasion, right, for it. But if a coworker of any faith is struggling, with important questions, trying perhaps to make sense of a terrible catastrophe that's happened in the person's life, an unspeakable catastrophe, it probably is not going to insult anybody's dignity or hurt anybody's feelings to say, Sarah, I want you to know that I'm going to be praying for you. Now that might open a conversation. Sarah might say, I'm grateful to you for doing that. I can't say that I myself am a religious person, but It's comforting for me to know. That means something to me. And then you might say, well, tell me about your faith, but were you raised with no faith, or were you brought up in a particular faith and lost it and went in a different direction? Now who knows where that conversation is going to go, but eventually it might be one that opens up a person to coming around to a faith, maybe even to the fullness of Catholic faith. You don't know. It's an art rather than a science. I can't give you a recipe. I can't give you a formula. But at a certain level, we all know when to move a little more gently and when maybe a somewhat more bold step. Would you like to come to Mass with me on Sunday? You're very welcome. Catholic Church is, as Bronwyn helped me, wrote Ulysses. Joyce. As James Joyce said, the Catholic Church is here comes everybody. If you like hanging around with sinners, come to Mass. We got them, right? Every dimension, right? I have an essay about St. Paul's that you can find online if you're interested in it. Do a Google search for First Things magazine, and my essay was quoting James Joyce. It was called "Here Comes Everybody," and it was just about what I observed one day at Mass at St. Paul. I just happened to look around. My mother would say, I should have been paying attention, saying my prayers. So I'm looking around and I'm seeing, it's just amazing. Every social class, economic, stratum, race, ethnicity that you can think of. There was a Nobel Prize winning scientist from the university sitting next to an Italian immigrant lady who I'm sure is the sort of person who gets us Catholics accused of being Mary worshipers and things like that. It was just wonderful. It really is, here comes everybody. And everybody's welcome. So, inviting a friend to come to Mass. Arranging for a friend to meet somebody you think might be a good spiritual influence on that person. Let's have lunch, let's have tea, get together. I think there's somebody you want to meet here. His name's Michael McClane. He dresses in a black suit, funny guy. Does that help? Thanks. Yeah.
Hi, Professor. Welcome. My question is, I think someone might correct my current events. Yesterday, I believe a Senate bill to end religious exemptions for families that didn't want to vaccinate their children was basically dead on arrival. I think there was a big protest. The vote was canceled by Senator Sweeney. I would be interested in your views on that topic, on religious exemptions for people who don't want to vaccinate their children and how that may affect the greater good. And if I may, just piggyback on another issue coming up in the Senate, in the New Jersey Senate, is, and I think this is still the case, Father, is for health care not having a religious exemption.
The governor has to sign it, but it's...
Is it passed?
He hasn't signed it yet.
Okay. Ending religious exemption for providing insurance for abortifacients and gender reassignment surgery for religious institutions. Those are two hot button issues, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts on those, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, the second one is an outrage. It's an absolute outrage. And if Catholics in this state do not rise up, joined arm in arm with our evangelical brothers, Orthodox Jews, faithful Muslims, other people who see what a grotesque violation of conscience this is, then shame on us. We're to blame. This is democracy. We elect these people. And they should fear us. When it comes to stuff like this, when they go trampling the rights, and not just our rights, not just because they're ours, it's also Orthodox Jews, and it's also faithful Muslims, it's also evangelical brothers, it's also Mormons. We should be standing together with each other and standing for each other. And by the way, even if it's something that doesn't affect our tradition or our community, but affects theirs, we should be standing up for that as well. I am on the board of the Becket, but I'm very proud that we stood up against the people who wanted to stop circumcision of Jewish babies, the so-called intactivists, they call themselves. So even if it's not our religious problem, we need to be standing up for everybody's religious freedom. That truly is an outrage. On the first one, this is more difficult, and here I'm going to shock my friend Pat Zinzer, who's here, by saying, I actually don't have an opinion. There's some things I don't have opinions on, believe it or not. And this is one, and I have a very good reason for not having an opinion about that. which is, I don't know anything about it. I don't know enough to be able to have an opinion. I know how I think the law ought to treat the vaccination. I mean, I know the theory of how it should handle it. It needs to apply that test. Is there a compelling state interest? And is the policy, the mandatory vaccination policy, does that represent the least intrusive or invasive means of advancing that compelling state interest? So that's, I think, how to think about the problem. As to whether there is a compelling state interest, as to whether there's another way to do it, I'm just not sure. I don't know quite enough about the science. It could be that with different vaccines the answer is different, because those are public health. Kathy's, or was it Kathy or Betsy? Betsy, I think, is here, who has public health background, and those how to handle the kinds of diseases against which we can vaccinate with different levels of effectiveness and so forth is a fact-specific, fact-dependent sort of thing, and we would need to know a lot more about the facts in order to make a decision about it. But here, at least, it's not just as in the second case you're talking about, just a grotesque effort to whip people into line with an ideology. Here they're at least trying to protect public health, right? Rightly or wrongly, they're at least trying to protect public health. This is an ideological hit job, and really it's an effort to cleanse the medical profession of Catholic, evangelical, Mormon, Muslim, any devout doctor or nurse or other healthcare professional. It's an attempt to drive us out of the medical field so that a monopoly is held by people who hold a certain contemporary secular progressive ideology, and we have to stand up against that and fight with all our might. And by the way, although I'm one of those guys, I do want the bishops to speak out about it. We can't just wait around wait for the bishops. This is not the bishop's problem. I do want them to speak. I'm for that and so forth. And want to give them a hard time, I'm with you. Tell Bishop O'Connell. Robbie says, give you a hard time. But it's more fundamentally up to us. We're the voters. Organize. Yeah, you had a question.
A question regarding I guess you would call it a crisis of adult children leaving the faith. Yeah. And to your point about coercion, and you're claiming that parents coerce them by sending them through school Catholic and force that religion on them. And is there an age where you can say, well, you shouldn't be doing it, and make them make their own decisions based on the coercion factor, or what's that?
There's no science to this. There's no recipe. Different kids are different. Here's what I think is a very bad mistake that people are tempted to make these days. The idea is, well, why should I bring up a kid? Why should I coerce a kid in a religion? We'll just bring up our kid as nothing, and then, when the kid turns 16 or the kid turns 18 or whatever the magic age is, then he'll choose whether to be, I don't know, Amish. That would mean no more Amish, right? There is no, and the falsehood, the mistake there is to believe that there's this religiously neutral position out there that you can leave the car idling in for 16 or 18 years and then they go choose a religion. That isn't how it works. So I think you should raise the kid in your faith. If you're Jewish, you have a son, you circumcise the son, you bring him up in the covenant, you bring him up in the faith. If a daughter, you bring her up in the faith. If you're Catholic, you have your kids, you bring them up in the Catholic faith. Now, there will come a point when it would be improper for you to use some methods beyond persuasion, like threatening to cut them out of the will and stuff like that, to get them, because you don't want them to do something authentic. You don't want to be a fake. That third element of the good of religion that I was talking about there, authentically living in line with your true judgments, you don't want to tempt your kid to be a hypocrite or to be a fake or to be just an inauthentic person. That undermines the person's integrity. So you can't do that. But I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with insisting that your 15 or even 16-year-old be at Mass on Sunday. Most of the time, I'll let you in on a secret if you don't know. If you're a parent, you do know. It's no big secret. Most of the time, it's not that the kid has any big conscientious objection to going to Mass. The kid's lazy. I'm going to go to Mass. I don't get anything out of it, and all this stuff, right? one of the things there that it teaches us, we have to catechize. If they think they're supposed to be getting something out of the liturgical experience, they don't have a very good understanding of the Catholic faith. So that's a failure on our part and on the part of those responsible for catechesis. So we have something to work on there. But I'm not too worried about that. Once the kid's older, once the kid's in college, once the kid's out of college, I think at that point, if the kid is drifting off, drifting away, and it's so easy to do in our culture, everything is pushing you in the wrong direction, making things very tough for parents raising kids. I feel so sorry for young parents today. Girl's a tomboy, the next thing you know, they're putting her on puberty-blocking drugs and giving her a mastectomy at 13. I mean, this is insane. And this is what parents face today. I mean, I was a parent of small kids not that long ago, right? Maybe 25 years ago, and at least I wasn't worried about my daughter being put on puberty-blocking drugs because she liked to play with trucks, not dolls. This is what parents face today. But for adult kids, of course, all the pressures are away from faith. The whole ideology, the media, entertainment, industry, business, everything's pushing them away. Here, I think, getting them serious about the existential, I'm going to use the word now, about the existential questions, about the basic questions of meaning and value. If they're drifting off, I'm wondering if they're thinking about those questions. And I think there's never anything wrong with pushing hard to think about those questions. Now, if they think about those questions, I'll be darned if I can figure out why or how anybody could come to secularist conclusions based on those questions. Some people do. But there, if I were just a betting man, I'd bet a lot on Catholic teaching because it's very coherent and it's just powerful. And I think if they're just open to raising the questions, what the church has by way of its teaching to offer really is powerful. It's coherent. It has integrity. It makes sense. It hangs together when it comes to the big questions, to the great questions, the great questions of meaning and value. The real danger is that they'll lay aside the questions. Well, then, of course, you're not going to get the Catholic answer if you don't ask the questions. If you're content to be making money and working on, elevating your social status and all these false gods that people go chasing after today. I think there was a question over, So it's a good question. So the question is, Pope Benedict tells us, who's a good, strong Vatican II Catholic, right? He was there. He was emeritus. He was an expert at the council. He wasn't a bishop at the time, but was an important expert at the council, assisting the bishops. He says, in interpreting the documents of the Church, including the documents of the Second Vatican Council, we should use a hermeneutic of continuity. That is, interpret the language, like the language I quoted, in a way that is consistent with, to the extent possible, the prior teaching of the Church. So we've had a lot of councils, going all the way back to the ancient councils, the Council of Jerusalem, the Council of Nicaea, and so forth. The Council of Trent in response to the Reformation. Vatican I, the First Vatican Council. And then in the 1960s, it's the Second Vatican Council. And our friend here points out that while those earlier councils, including the First Vatican Council, so as late as the late 19th century, were primarily dogmatic councils. They were concerned with dogmatic teaching. The Second Vatican Council is primarily concerned with pastoral matters and not with dogmatic teaching. Now, that's only a 5/8 truth, but it's a story that a lot of Catholics tell themselves as if it were the whole truth. There are doctrinal teachings or explications of doctrinal teachings in the Second Vatican Council. Yes, it is concerned with a lot of pastoral stuff, but we can't dismiss teachings that aren't to our taste, let's say. If we happen not to like that teaching, we can't dismiss it on the grounds that, it's a pastoral council, so we actually don't have to believe what the council fathers said. It's an ecumenical council, and they did address questions that pertain to doctrine. But who am I to disagree with Pope Benedict? I agree with Pope Benedict that we should interpret the past in line with, the current teaching in line with the past, and not abandon past teaching unless we're told explicitly to do so. unless we cannot square the contemporary teaching with past teaching, which could raise the question, depending on the status of the previous teaching, the level of authority of the previous teaching, of whether the current teaching is valid. People are raising those kinds of questions with some of what Pope Francis says today. And it was less common, but it wasn't completely uncommon. Think of the Lefebvrists were raising that question with respect to the teachings of the Vatican Council, most especially the two that I talked about tonight, Dignitatis Humanae and Nostra Aetate. Why did they're sometimes called extreme right or extreme conservatives, break with the church, led by Marcel Lefebvre, the bishop who broke with the church over the Second Vatican Council, the one bishop who had his name removed from his signature removed from the council documents? It's because he thought the teaching in Nostra Aetate and Dignitatis Humanae not only couldn't be squared with certain previous teachings of the church, but the previous teachings of the church were at such a high level of authority that you have to reject the teachings in Dignitatis Humanae and Nostra Aetate. I'm sure he's wrong about that. And I think going into schism over that was really a terrible thing that Lefebvre did. I don't doubt his conscience. He in conscience, I suppose, thought he had to do it. But it was a terrible thing. Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul II, John Paul the Great, I think were entirely correct to affirm those teachings of the council and to affirm that in the respects in which they deviated at all from previous teaching, they were nevertheless reliable in correcting those teachings. So, teachings of 19th century popes against democracy, for example, to some extent can be harmonized by a hermeneutic of continuity with modern Catholic teaching on democracy, especially the teachings of John Paul II in line with the Second Vatican Council, by clarifying what we mean by democracy. Was what the Pope is actually, what Pope, let's say Leo XIII, was actually condemning, is that what we today mean by democracy? Is that what the Church today means when it praises democracy? And to the extent the answer is no, it's not, well, then you can square the circle. Same with religious liberty. There are 19th century documents of the magisterium, especially the papal magisterium, that treat religious liberty as a heresy. Well, what did they mean by religious liberty? Well, think about this in European terms, right? You're a European. You hear the word religious liberty. You're a Catholic. You're a Catholic European, especially in the 19th century. When you hear religious liberty, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? The French Revolution and French revolutionary doctrine, the idea that no religion is true, or all religions are equally true to the extent there's any truth, or equally false. That religious vows don't bind, because you can't bind your conscience against future changes of mind, or that it's immoral to take religious vows because you're trying to constrain your own mind against future changes of mind. Well, if that's what you mean by religious liberty, yeah, the Catholic Church is against that. But that's not what Vatican II means by that's not what John Paul II, that's not what Benedict means by religious liberty. What they mean is what I tried to explicate here. Does that help?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, sir. Cornel West is an important, very prominent scholar and public intellectual. He was a professor of religion at Princeton for many years. He's now left us to go up to Harvard, where he teaches at Harvard Divinity School. He's a leading figure in the African American community, especially the intellectual community. He's very much on the left. He's the honorary chairman of Democratic Socialists of America. He is a Christian, someone who was raised in the historic African American church, that still attends and considers himself to be a faithful Christian. Someone who defends Christianity against atheism, including the atheism of some of our colleagues at Princeton. And he's one of my dearest friends in the world. And although we disagree on most political things, we have some deep areas of agreement, not only our Christian faith, but also our beliefs about the importance of freedom of speech, civil discourse, the engagement, the need to be challenged and to challenge, and the engagement of ideas, the belief that the way we pursue knowledge is by trying to understand and advance the very best arguments for competing sides. So together in 2017, we put out a statement called Truth-Seeking Democracy and Freedom of Thought and Expression, in which we condemned a lot of the bad stuff that's going on campuses where people are being shut down. To his very great credit, although he's a man of the left, Cornel has spoken out in support of conservative students and faculty members at colleges who've had their rights to free speech violated or curtailed. He's also spoken out on the need for greater diversity of viewpoints, including more conservative voices in our mainstream colleges and universities. He's interested, as I am, in the big questions, in the questions of meaning and value. And starting in 2006, we began teaching together. We co-teach seminars. They're kind of great book seminars that begin with classical Greek writers like Sophocles and Plato, and then go all the way up into the 20th century with figures like John Dewey and C.S. Lewis. And the partnership and collaboration, both in the classroom and we go around the country doing presentations together, have been among the most fulfilling of my 34 years in the Academy. He's a very, very dear friend, someone from whom I've learned a great deal and someone I respect and admire. And I think it shows you that we can have deep friendships and learn a lot from each other across some pretty broad ideological divides. It's a wonderful question. Bronwyn McShay is a very distinguished scholar. She's a visiting scholar at Princeton University in the program that I direct, the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. Works on early modern history. And for those who couldn't hear the question, she made the point that in 1965, when Dignitatis Humanae was handed down, the Council Fathers just assumed, as everybody did, that, quite apart from the questions of state coercion, among the things that kept people faithful was institutional structures, families, intact families, Catholic families, the church itself. I mean, you all know, right? It's not a big secret the church is in disarray today. Okay? The church was not in disarray. At least it didn't appear to be in disarray in 1965. The church seemed powerful and together and solid, there. Institutions of civil society, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and all sorts of institutional structures that supported people and helped them from just drifting off into all kinds of bad stuff that's deeply contrary to faith and morals, at least as Catholics and other Christians and other believers understand that. So Bronwyn asks, were the Council Fathers naive to think they could count on that? And my answer is, yeah, the Council Fathers were naive, but look, they didn't have a monopoly on naivete in 1965. Think of how naive everybody was. This is how we got so many of the dreadful things that have undermined the moral foundations of our culture. Think of no-fault divorce, right? Everybody was naive. Everybody thought, well, this is a progressive reform. Who could be against it? If two people are together and they're fighting all the time and they want to be divorced, or one of them wants to be divorced, at least doesn't want to be in the marriage, why should the law force them to be in the marriage? If there's a fault standard like we've always had, all that means is that it's a protracted legal battle, and the courts we end up spending social resources because courts are expensive, and it's just a lot of trouble. Wouldn't it just be easier for everybody if one person wanted out? You don't want to be in marriage anymore? Let them get out of the marriage. You dissolve the marriage. And by the way, it's better for the kids because the parents won't fight. It's bad for kids to be in a house where the parents don't want to be together and they're fighting all the time. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but that was profoundly naive. We now know rigorously, the work of people like my colleague, Sarah McClanahan, the sociologist at Princeton, shows that divorce, and especially no-fault divorce, was a catastrophic change. What they didn't realize in their naivete was that it's not that if you change the legal regime, if you change the law, the people who would get divorced anyway get divorced and nobody else gets divorced. They didn't realize what the impact would be on how people understand their own marriages, how people understand what marriage is, how people understand the obligations of marriage, how people conduct themselves in marriages. It was profoundly naive. And that's how we got it. And now we can't figure out how to get out of it. Everybody now, maybe not everybody who knows anything about the sociology now knows that the divorce culture was a disaster, a catastrophe. And nobody knows how we get out. My friend John DiIulio, I actually had lunch with John today. It wasn't today he said it, but in a different context, he's a wonderful scholar at the University of Pennsylvania. He said what the sociologists are like a person who enters a room and sees a friend dead on the floor with a knife in his back. And clearly he died of the wound of the knife in the back. And then you think, I should pull the knife out of his back. But guess what? He's not going to come back to life. That's the condition that we're in. We know what killed the patient. But if we pull out the knife, it doesn't bring the patient back to life. So, yeah, there was a lot of naivete, including about whether we could count on these institutions in the future, their health and their vitality, institutions of civil society, and the church itself, herself. But I don't think, Bronwyn, that greater knowledge of that, as naive as they were, would have changed the development of the church's view on the matter, because it's really strictly a kind of logical, rational argument that is then reinforced by the data of revelation and the understanding of faith as a free assent of the intellect and will to the propositions asserted. So I think it was a necessary development, and one that once the church focused on it, it would be inevitable that it would get there. But that's not to say that they didn't imagine that the social changes that we then saw happen weren't caused by this, but we then saw happen were, well, they did. It's not to say that they foresaw those changes. They didn't. They clearly didn't. Nobody did. Well, a few prophets did. But these are people of the sort of Solzhenitsyn type. Evie.
Yeah, I was curious if you could clarify what Dignitatis Humanae did not condemn. So Dignitatis Humanae says no religious coercion from the perspective of the state, but what options does it leave open for the state to encourage the moral life?
Oh, yes, very good.
And also from perspective, we were talking about evangelizing earlier. What does it kind of leave open for individual people to do with regard to encouraging knowledge of the truth?
Yeah, very good. So Evie Bailing, who is the events coordinator at the Madison Program at Princeton, asks a very good question. What did the fathers say in Dignitatis Humanae, the Second Vatican Council, about what doesn't change? What in the church's teaching on the role of the state remains unchanged, and what the obligations of Catholics are with respect to that. Do I have it basically right, Evie? Yeah, okay. So, first of all, it is the state's job to protect public health, safety, and morals. They use the European or the civil law expression, the Napoleonic Code expression, public order. Now, when we in English hear the term public order, we tend to think of stopping riots. But in the European context, you understand this, Mariana, in the European context, it's a broader, it encompasses what we would try to capture with the idea of public health, safety, and morality. So things that undermine the public morals, like pornography, that the state has every right to forbid, every right to attack. That's not a violation of anybody's religious liberty. That's not a violation of anybody's human rights. The state does well when it protects the public order, broadly speaking, in that sense. So it's not a general libertarian theory. And it's certainly not, as I was at pains to point out, any kind of theory that says we have a social contract here. You know, you get to do what you want to do, I get to do what I want to do, we stay out of each other's way. That kind of libertarianism or liberalism is just alien to the Catholic tradition, and it's not the basis of this argument for human rights. And certainly not for the right to religious freedom. Interestingly, it also says in the document that nothing changes with respect to the obligations of the state to the true religion. By the true religion, they mean the religion in which the fullness of religious truth subsists, the Catholic religion. Now, it doesn't specify what those obligations are. So that's got to be read in view of the fact that you can't use coercive means to promote the Catholic faith or any other faith. But presumably it would mean things like blue laws, not necessarily requiring them, but saying that this is something that the state could legitimately do to make it easier for people to honor the Sabbath, to be at Mass on Sunday, to treat Sunday as a day of rest or what have you. Also, interestingly, it goes out of its way to say that it does not rule out as in principle a violation of freedom of religion state-established religions. Now, you might say, especially we Americans sometimes tend to think, well, but wait, isn't the separation of church and state, isn't the non-establishment of religion essential to religious freedom? But when you think about it, it's really a distinct thing. I mean, they're related, obviously, and you can certainly use religious establishments or established religions to undermine religious freedom. But I lived for 5 years of my life in England, and England has an established religion, the Anglican Church. And obviously, I'm a Catholic. I'm not a member of the Anglican Church. I wasn't a member of the established church. And in fact, I was a member of the church that was historically most badly persecuted by members of the established church. Catholics were not treated as well as Jews were, or later during the imperial period as Hindus were. I mean, Catholic emancipation wasn't until the 19th century in England. And yet, despite being a Catholic in England during the years I lived there in the late 80s, my religious freedom was perfectly respected. And in fact, support for the establishment, as best I could tell, I didn't do a systematic poll, but just talking to my classmates and people on the faculty where I was at Oxford University, and my sense just talking to English folks, was that support for the established church, keeping the established church, was higher among non-Anglicans than among serious Anglicans. The serious Anglicans wanted rid of the establishment because they knew that the establishment had basically turned the Anglican Church into an instrument of the state. It's just a kind of set of decorations. You know, the archbishop's there to crown the king or queen when it comes to open part. You know, all these ceremonial roles that the religion plays. The vibrant Anglicans, which when I was there were the so-called low church evangelical Anglicans. I'm trying to think of the name of that. St. Aldate's in Oxford. There's a church called St. Aldate's, which had a very dynamic evangelical, he was an Episcopal priest, but what we in America would call an evangelical preacher. Well, in that church, you know, they didn't think of the establishment as a good thing. They thought of it as something that really held the church back from being evangelical and really reaching out. So they wanted the distance. By contrast, the Hindus and the Catholics, they thought that all the pomp and ceremony and that was cool. You know, the dress of the bishops and all that stuff. So, you know, there may be very good reasons for getting rid of established churches or for not having them in places, even where you could have a Catholic establishment, some Latin American countries, for example. But in all honesty, Dignitatis Humanae is very clear that there's not anything wrong in principle with having an established faith. It doesn't require it, but it doesn't forbid it. Evie, have I answered the question?
And my part two was clarifying. So the gentleman over there asked the question about evangelizing, and I was just hoping that you could clarify whether the Second Vatican Council is trying to discourage us from teaching people on personal levels when it's true.
Oh, no, of course not. So the question is the Second Vatican Council discouraging us from engaging our neighbors personally about the truth of the Catholic faith? The answer is clearly not. Clearly not. And in fact, we are required. I mean, we don't need Dignitatis Humanae for this. We've got it right there in the Gospels, right? The Great Commission, Jesus himself. Go out and make disciples of all nations. That's not just for the apostles, right? That's for all of us. And that 7/8 truth is we do it by example, but there is that eighth that we don't like so much because we're not comfortable doing it, but we really are required to do it, which is to find opportunities, look for opportunities to actually bring people along by talking about spiritual issues, encouraging them to think about spiritual issues, in the hope and perhaps even expectation that if there's sufficient thought and attention and goodwill, they're going to come around to the fullness of truth. Any last questions? Mariana, did people hear the question? So what about, as I mentioned, Father and I were talking about black masses, satanic masses. What's the limit? Mariana Orlandi, who is visiting us in the Madison Program at Princeton from Italy, she's a lawyer, legal scholar, asks, what about the satanic mass? Should that be prohibited, or for prudential reasons, or for principled reasons, does even that have to be tolerated? Well, here's my view about that, and this is something I really need to give more thought to. I haven't given enough to. I did have to face it squarely 4 years ago. I was teaching at Harvard at the time, and Harvard University faced the case of a black mass on campus. So I ended up saying that I thought Harvard University should tolerate the black mass on campus, unless there was a stolen consecrated host. The Satanists had advertised, had claimed that they had possession of a stolen host. That, I think, is the limit. If people are doing that, Harvard shouldn't allow that on the campus. On the other hand, if they're just, doing their version of a play, if they're pretending that the unconsecrated host that they bought is the real thing and whatever, I think prudentially the smart thing to do is just to ignore them and let them go and not give them attention and publicity, which unfortunately a lot of the Catholic students were doing. Partly, in fact, and partly probably because they believed. It turned out wrongly, by the way. It wasn't a consecrated host. They were lying. They're Satanists. They do that, right? They lie. They didn't have a consecrated host. They hadn't stolen a consecrated host. But they pretended that. So the Catholic students got all worked up and demanded that university officials crack down. And my big worry was that we're playing into the hands here of people who will use that kind of precedent to shut down Catholic things. We won't say he when it's a she, the use of the pronouns and all that stuff, and suddenly they're going to use that against us. So prudentially, I was very strongly urging people to respect freedom of speech unless we had the consecrated host. Then that was it. Now, I think we should do that purely on prudential reasons, on prudential grounds, Mariana. I would not say there is any value of any type in Satanism, none. It's the opposite of value. It's an attack on value. That's the whole point of the thing. Whether Satanism even should count as a religion, I think, is a dubious thing. It's a kind of a-religion. It's kind of a reverse of religion. It's not what Buddhism is. It's not what Hinduism is. It's an attempt to not pursue the good, which all the religions we normally think of as religions, whether they do it well or badly, they're trying to pursue the good. The whole point of Satanism is to worship evil, is to invert good and evil. So here I think it's just a prudential question. We don't want to empower the state or in this case, in the case that I faced, the university officials, to crack down where they might use the precedent to oppress us and people like ourselves, other believers. But even there's got to be a limit. And I thought a genuine black mass that's got a genuine stolen host, now they really have stepped over the line. I could see Harvard saying, look, you have the right to get up there and dance around and wear your silly costumes and all that stuff, but you don't have the right to take from another religious community its sacred objects and use them in your worship. And the only way they can get a real host is to steal it. A consecrated host is to steal it. So there's no way it could be theirs. And with that, I want to thank Father McClane and all of you for coming out and for sticking with us.